Julian Thorne stood on the balcony of the Plaza Hotel, raising a glass of vintage champagne to a room full of Manhattan's elite. He had it all: a billion-dollar merger on the horizon, a stunning young fiancée named Tiffany clinging to his arm, and a past he had successfully buried, or so he thought. He was seconds away from announcing the engagement that would seal his empire's future. But as the applause swelled, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom didn't just open. They slammed against the walls. The music died. The cheers evaporated. Because walking down the aisle wasn't a late guest. It was the woman Julian swore he had divorced 5 years ago. And she wasn't holding a gift. She was holding a red legal folder that was about to cost him everything. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel didn't just sparkle. They seemed to judge anyone net worth was under 8 figures. For Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Logistics, tonight was not just a party. It was a coronation. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian tuxedo, glancing at his reflection in the darkened window that overlooked Central Park. At 42, Julian looked the part of the master of the universe. Silver fox hair perfectly coiffed, a jawline that seemed carved from granite, and a smile that could charm a snake out of a basket. "Darling, stop admiring yourself. You're making the waiters jealous," a voice purred beside him. Julian turned to see Tiffany St. Clair. She was 24, a former runway model, and currently the most expensive accessory Julian owned. She wore a dress made of liquid silver that clung to her frame like a second skin, and on her finger sat a 10-carat diamond that cost more than the gross domestic product of a small island nation. "I'm not admiring myself, Tiff," Julian lied smoothly, taking her waist. "I'm looking at the future. Do you see that man over there? The one with the cane?" Tiffany squinted her perfectly lashed eyes. "The old guy who looks like he smells like mothballs?" "That is Arthur Sterling," Julian whispered, his voice trembling with greed. "He controls the shipping routes in the Pacific. Tonight, after we announce our engagement, he signs the merger. Thorne Logistics becomes global. And you, my dear, become the Queen of New York." Tiffany giggled, the sound light and airy, devoid of any real substance. "I just want everyone to see the ring. My cousin Jessica is here, and she's been bragging about her husband's promotion to regional manager. I can't wait to see her face when she realizes she's breathing the same air as a billionaire's fiancé." Julian chuckled, guiding her toward the center of the room. He loved this about Tiffany. She was simple. She liked shiny things. She liked attention, and she didn't ask questions about business. She was the polar opposite of Ilara. Ilara. The name flickered in his mind like a dead light bulb. His ex-wife. The woman who had supported him when he was selling electronics out of the back of a van in Queens. The woman who had worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his first business license. She was plain, practical Ilara. She wore comfortable shoes and worried about 401ks. She read contracts. She asked questions. She was boring. Getting rid of her 5 years ago had been the smartest move of his life. Well, getting rid of her was a harsh way to put it. Julian preferred to think of it as outgrowing her. He had handled the divorce quietly. He told her the business was failing, that they were bankrupt, and that they needed to separate to protect her credit. He had presented her with papers. She had cried. She had signed. And he had given her a small settlement, enough to buy a condo in New Jersey, and sent her on her way. He hadn't seen her since. He assumed she was clipping coupons somewhere in the suburbs, probably married to a plumber. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice boomed over the speakers, snapping Julian back to the glorious present. "Please welcome your host, the CEO of Thorne Logistics, Mr. Julian Thorne." The applause was thunderous. Julian stepped onto the low stage, Tiffany trailing slightly behind him to ensure the spotlight hit her diamonds just right. Julian raised his hands for silence, basking in the adoration. Thank you. Thank you all. Tonight is a night of new beginnings. As many of you know, Thorn Logistics has been my life's work, but a king needs a queen. He turned and extended a hand to Tiffany. The crowd cooed. I am thrilled to announce that not only are we finalizing the merger with Sterling Global tonight, Julian said, nodding to Arthur Sterling in the front row, but I am also announcing my engagement to the love of my life, the future Mrs. Thorn, Tiffany St. Clair. The room erupted. Waiters popped corks on fresh bottles of Dom Perignon. Tiffany struck a pose, flashing the ring to the photographers. Arthur Sterling nodded approvingly, raising his glass. To the happy couple, Arthur shouted, his voice raspy but commanding. To the merger, Julian shouted back, feeling invincible. He took a sip of his champagne, the bubbles crisp and cold. He looked out over the sea of faces, bankers, politicians, celebrities. They all envied him. He had won the game of life. He was about to lean in and kiss Tiffany for the cameras when the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a lack of sound. Starting from the back near the grand entrance, the applause didn't taper off naturally. It was strangled. Silence spread like a contagion, moving row by row toward the stage. People stopped clapping. They stopped drinking. Heads turned, necks craned. Julian frowned, lowering his glass. What is it? Is the catering cart on fire? Tiffany stood on her tiptoes. I think someone crashed the party. Look at that dress. Julian squinted against the stage lights. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom, usually manned by 2 large security guards, were wide open. The guards were nowhere to be seen. Standing in the archway was a lone figure. She was wearing red. Not just red. It was a crimson so deep and vibrant it looked like a fresh wound against the gold and cream decor of the plaza. The dress was structured, architectural, with a high neck and a back that plunged dangerously low. It was the kind of dress that didn't ask for attention. It demanded submission. Julian blinked. The silhouette was familiar, but the posture was wrong. The woman he remembered slumped her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller. This woman stood with the stillness of a predator. She began to walk. The click of her heels on the marble floor echoed in the silent room. Click, click, click. As she moved into the light of the chandeliers, Julian felt the blood drain from his face, pooling somewhere in his expensive Italian leather shoes. The messy brown bun was gone, replaced by sleek, jet-black hair cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed a face of porcelain-pale skin. The glasses were gone, revealing eyes that were cold, hard, and piercingly blue. "My God!" someone in the front row whispered. "Who is that?" Julian's throat went dry. He knew who it was, but his brain refused to process it. It was like seeing a ghost, only this ghost was wearing Valentino and looked ready to burn the haunted house to the ground. "Elara," Julian whispered, the name escaping his lips like a curse. Elara Vance, or as the invitation list would have read if she were on it, Mrs. Elara Thorn, kept her eyes locked on the stage. She could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on her. 5 years ago, this would have made her vomit with anxiety. 5 years ago, she was the woman who apologized to the table when she bumped into it. But 5 years is a long time. Enough time to learn. Enough time to heal. And most importantly, enough time to hire the best forensic accountants in the tri-state area. She gripped the red leather legal folder in her left hand. It felt heavy, not with paper, but with the destruction she was about to unleash. "Excuse me," a young waiter murmured, stepping out of her path as if she were royalty. She didn't acknowledge him. Her focus was entirely on the man standing on the stage. Julian. He looked older, she noted. The grey hair was new, probably carefully cultivated to make him look distinguished. He looked terrified. Good. And next to him, the girl. Tiffany. Ilara had read the dossier. 24 years old. Likes ponies and Instagram. Collateral damage. Ilara felt a pang of pity for her, but it was fleeting. If you play in the mud with pigs, you get dirty. Ilara reached the middle of the dance floor. The silence was absolute now. Even the kitchen staff had peeked out from the swinging doors to watch. "Security!" Julian's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, deeper this time. "Security! We have an intruder!" No one moved. Ilara stopped 10 feet from the stage. She looked up at Julian, tilting her head slightly. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom, it carried to the back row. It was smooth, rich, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You didn't send me an invite. I assumed it was lost in the mail." Julian laughed, a nervous, jittery sound. "Ilara, is that you? My God, you look different." He turned to the crowd, spreading his hands in a gesture of helpless confusion. "Everyone, I apologize. This is my ex-wife. She's been going through a very difficult time mentally since the divorce. I believe she's off her medication." A ripple of sympathetic murmurs went through the crowd. Ah, the crazy ex, a classic tragedy. Tiffany stepped forward, emboldened by Julian's explanation. She looked Ilara up and down with a sneer. "Honey, this is a private event. The soup kitchen is 3 blocks down. You can't just barge in here in a rented dress and ruin my engagement." Ilara shifted her gaze to Tiffany. She didn't sneer. She didn't frown. She looked at Tiffany with the clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor. "Rented," Ilara repeated softly. "That's cute. This is a custom Alexander McQueen. And I didn't rent it. I bought it with the dividends from my stock portfolio, the one Julian thinks doesn't exist." Julian's smile faltered. "Ilara, that's enough. You're embarrassing yourself. Please just leave, and I'll write you a check for your trouble. I know money is tight for you." "Is it?" Ilara asked. She took a step closer to the stage. "Is money tight, Julian? Or is that just what you told me 5 years ago when you forced me to sign those papers in that dark little office in Queens? The company is bankrupt, Ilara. We have to divorce to save you from the debt collectors, Ilara." Julian's face hardened. "It was the truth. I built this empire from ashes after you left. You walked away when things got hard." "I didn't walk away," Ilara said, her voice rising just enough to cut through the air like a whip. "I was pushed. You told me it was for my own good. You told me you loved me too much to drag me down with you." She paused, looking around the room. She made eye contact with Arthur Sterling, the billionaire investor. "Mr. Sterling," Ilara said, nodding to him, "I admire your work with Pacific Cargo. Very impressive. I imagine you're a man who values due diligence?" Arthur Sterling frowned, leaning forward on his cane. "I am. Who are you exactly?" "She's nobody," Julian shouted, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "Arthur, ignore her. She's a bitter woman looking for a payout. Security. Where the hell is security?" "The security guards work for Thorn Logistics," Ilara said calmly, "which creates a bit of a conflict of interest, doesn't it, considering the documents I'm holding?" She lifted the red folder. Julian came down the stairs of the stage, moving aggressively into her personal space. He towered over her, using his physical size to intimidate, a tactic that used to work wonders on the old Ilara. "Get out," he hissed, low enough that the microphone didn't pick it up. Get out now, or I will destroy you. I will bury you in so many lawsuits you won't be able to afford air to breathe. You signed the divorce papers. It's over. You have nothing." Ilara didn't flinch. She smelled his cologne, sandalwood and expensive lies. She smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Julian had ever seen. "I signed the papers you gave me, Julian," she whispered back. "But you were always so cheap. You didn't want to pay a real lawyer to file them, did you? You gave them to your cousin, Vinny, to file at the courthouse to save $500. Julian froze. "Vinny," Ilara continued, "who had a gambling problem. Vinny, who took your filing fee and went to Atlantic City instead. Vinny, who never actually filed the divorce decree with the state of New York." The color didn't just drain from Julian's face. It vanished. "No," he stammered. "No, I have the decree. It's in my safe." "You have a piece of paper with a stamp on it," Ilara said. "A fake stamp. I checked the registry, Julian. I checked it 5 years ago, and then I checked it every week for 5 years. She stepped back, raising her voice so the whole room could hear. "You see, everyone thinks they are at an engagement party for Julian Thorne and his mistress." Gasps echoed through the room. Tiffany looked ready to slap her. "But you can't get engaged, Julian," Ilara said, opening the red folder and pulling out a certified document with a gold seal. "Because bigamy is illegal in the state of New York, and as of this morning, according to the county clerk, you and I have been happily married for 15 years. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that precedes a bomb blast. Arthur Sterling was the first to speak. He stood up slowly, his cane thumping against the floor. "Julian," he barked, his voice gravelly. "Is this true?" Julian spun around, his hands shaking. "Of course not. It's a clerical error. A mistake. Vinny told me it was done. I have the papers. Vinny is currently serving 3 years for fraud," Ilara interjected smoothly. "He wasn't very good at forging court seals, apparently, but he was very good at taking your money." Tiffany grabbed Julian's arm, her fingernails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Julian, what is she talking about? Are you married? You told me she was history. You told me she was a leech you paid off." "She is history," Julian yelled, losing his composure entirely. He pointed a trembling finger at Ilara. You witch! You knew for 5 years and you said nothing?" "I waited," Ilara corrected him. I watched you take the designs I drew on napkins, the logistics software architecture, and claim it was your genius idea. I watched you build Thorne Logistics using the seed money from my inheritance, which you claimed was lost in the bankruptcy. I watched you buy yachts and penthouses while I lived in a studio apartment in Jersey. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "I wanted to speak up," she admitted, "but my lawyer advised against it. He said, wait until he makes a move that requires absolute legal certainty. Wait until he puts his head in the noose." Ilara gestured to the banner hanging above the stage. Thorne Logistics and Sterling Global, a merger of giants. "This merger," Ilara said, turning to Mr. Sterling. "I read the prospectus. It requires Julian Thorne to put up 51% of his personal stock in Thorne Logistics as collateral. Is that correct?" Arthur Sterling nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "It is." "Well," Ilara said, flipping to the second page of her document. "That presents a problem, because since there was no divorce, and since there was no prenuptial agreement, half of everything acquired during the marriage is marital property." She looked at Julian with a mock, sympathetic expression. "And since you built the entire company during our marriage, Julian, you don't own 100% of Thorne Logistics. You own 50%. The realization hit the room like a shockwave. If he only owns 50%, Arthur Sterling rumbled, he doesn't have the authority to pledge 51% as collateral. Exactly, Ilara said, which means this merger is built on fraud. You're lying, Julian screamed. He lunged for the folder in her hand, desperate to rip the papers to shreds. Give me that. But before he could touch her, a man in a dark suit stepped out from the crowd. He moved with a blur of speed, intercepting Julian and twisting his arm behind his back with practiced ease. Julian yelped in pain, bent over. Get off me, who are you? The man released him and flashed a badge. Detective Miller, NYPD, and I suggest you don't assault the witness, Mr. Thorne. Witness? Julian sputtered, rubbing his shoulder. Witness to what? To the investigation regarding tax evasion and securities fraud, Ilara answered for the detective. You see, Julian, when you file taxes as a single man for 5 years, but you're actually married, the IRS gets very upset, especially when you hide millions of dollars in offshore accounts that your wife technically co-owns. Tiffany let out a high-pitched shriek. Tax evasion? Fraud? Julian, you said you were clean. You said you were untouchable. I am, Julian insisted, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape, for an ally, for anything. This is a setup. She's framing me. Arthur, please, you know me. We've played golf. Arthur Sterling looked at Julian with pure disgust. I do business with men, Julian, not children who can't even manage their own divorce papers. The deal is off. No, Julian shouted. You can't. We signed the letter of intent. And I'm shredding it, Sterling said. He looked at Ilara. Mrs. Thorne, or should I say, Ms. Vance, you have my apologies for this charade. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, Ilara said, with a gracious nod. But we aren't done yet. She turned back to Julian. He looked small now. The master of the universe had shrunk to the size of a frightened, cheating husband. You see, Julian, Ilara said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The IRS investigation is bad. The failed merger is bad. But the real problem? The real problem is the spousal consent clause in the original incorporation documents of Thorne Logistics. Julian's eyes widened. He remembered. Buried deep in the original paperwork, back when they were young and in love, they had added a clause, a romantic gesture. Decisions regarding the sale or restructuring of the company require unanimous spousal consent. I never signed off on you acting as CEO, Ilara said. Technically, every decision you've made for the last 5 years is voidable. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel had transformed from a coronation into a crime scene of social suicide. The silence had broken, replaced by the frantic clicking of camera shutters and the hushed, excited whispers of 300 guests witnessing the most spectacular downfall in New York society history. Julian Thorne stood alone in the center of the dance floor. The spotlight was still on him, but it no longer felt like adoration. It felt like an interrogation lamp. He turned to Tiffany, his hands trembling as he reached for her. Tiffany, baby, listen to me. It's a technicality. It's a paperwork error. I have the best lawyers in the city. We can fix this. Just stand by me. Tiffany St. Clair looked down at his hand as if it were covered in sludge. The adoration that had been in her eyes 5 minutes ago, the look that said, I am marrying a billionaire, was gone. It was replaced by the cold, hard calculation of a woman who had just realized her investment had crashed to zero. She slowly pulled her arm away. A technicality, Tiffany repeated, her voice shrill. Julian, you just lost the merger. You're under investigation by the IRS, and apparently you're still married to her. She gestured vaguely toward Ilara, who was watching the scene with a serene, almost bored expression. "It doesn't matter," Julian pleaded, sweat dripping down his temple, ruining his makeup. "I still have the company. I still have the penthouse. I can buy you another ring, a bigger one." Tiffany laughed, but it was a cruel, hollow sound. She looked at the 10-carat diamond on her finger, the ring she had been flaunting all night. Then she looked at Ilara. "Hey," Tiffany called out to Ilara, "is it true about the assets? Does he really only own half?" Ilara didn't shout. She just nodded once, calm and precise. "Technically, less than half once the IRS levies the penalties for tax fraud. And since the penthouse was purchased 2 years ago, with company funds labelled as business expenses, it's currently being frozen by the court order I filed at 4:55 p.m. today." Tiffany's eyes widened. She looked back at Julian. "You don't even own the apartment." "I do, I will," Julian stammered. "Tiff, don't do this, I love you." "You love having a trophy," Tiffany spat. She began to twist the ring off her finger. For a second, Julian thought she was going to give it back, a noble gesture of ending things. Instead, she dropped the ring into her clutch purse and snapped it shut. "I'm keeping this," Tiffany announced. "Consider it a severance package for wasting 2 years of my youth." "You can't take that!" Julian lunged for her purse. "That's a $500,000 ring." Tiffany stepped back, and 2 of the security guards, who had been listening to Ilara's earlier speech about who actually paid their salaries, stepped in between them. They blocked Julian, crossing their arms. "Don't touch me," Tiffany hissed. She smoothed her silver dress, regained her composure, and turned to the crowd. "I would just like to say, I had no idea. I am a victim here, too." She walked away, her heels clicking rapidly as she made a beeline for the exit, not looking back once. Julian watched her go, his chest heaving. He felt stripped naked. He turned to Arthur Sterling, but the billionaire was already speaking to his assistants, undoubtedly instructing them to burn every contract with the name Thorne on it. Finally, Julian turned to Ilara. She hadn't moved. She stood like a statue of retribution in her crimson dress. "Are you happy?" Julian rasped, his voice broken. "You ruined my life. You destroyed everything I built. Why? Because I left you? Because I wanted to be happy?" Ilara walked toward him slowly. The crowd parted for her. She stopped inches from him, close enough that he could see the fine lines of determination around her eyes. "You didn't just leave me, Julian," she said softly. "If you had just left me, I would have cried, healed, and moved on. I loved you enough to let you go." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "But you didn't just leave. You gaslit me. You made me believe I was crazy for suspecting you were cheating. You made me believe we were broke so you could hide the money. You made me sign papers while I was medicated for the depression you caused. You stole my dignity, Julian. You stole my trust in reality." She straightened up, her voice returning to normal volume. "I'm not destroying what you built, Julian. I'm repossessing what I paid for." She turned to Detective Miller, who was waiting patiently by the stage. "Detective," Ilara said, "I believe Mr. Thorne is a flight risk. He has pilot's license and a private jet fueled at Teterboro Airport. Or, our private jet, I should say." Detective Miller nodded. "Mr. Thorne, I'm going to need you to come with us. We have some questions regarding your tax filings for the years 2020 through 2024. "I'm not going anywhere," Julian shouted, backing away. "This is insane. You can't arrest me at my own party." "Actually," Miller said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt, "we can." As the cold steel clicked around Julian's wrists, the flashbulbs went off in a frenzy. The image of Julian Thorne, tuxedo disheveled, face red with rage, handcuffed in the middle of the Plaza ballroom, would be on the cover of the New York Post the next morning. Elara watched him being led away. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply reached into her red folder, pulled out a single business card, and handed it to the confused MC. "Here," she said. "Call a taxi for Mr. Sterling, and tell the staff to keep the champagne flowing. I'm paying the bill tonight. After all, it's a celebration." The next morning, the sun rose over Manhattan, oblivious to the chaos it was illuminating. But inside the glass and steel headquarters of Thorn Logistics on Wall Street, the storm was just beginning. Employees huddled in cubicles, whispering. The news had broken overnight. The video of Julian's arrest was trending on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. "Knock a Thorn down" was the #1 hashtag. At 9 a.m. sharp, the elevator doors on the executive floor slid open. The staff expected to see lawyers. They expected to see police. Instead, they saw Elara. She wasn't wearing the red dress anymore. She was wearing a sharp, navy blue power suit that cost more than most cars. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon. She carried a briefcase in one hand and a Starbucks cup in the other. She walked past the reception desk. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who had been hired by Julian specifically for her looks rather than her typing speed, gaped at her. "Excuse me?" Sarah stammered. "You can't be back here. Mr. Thorne's office is restricted." Elara didn't stop walking. "Mr. Thorne is currently being arraigned at the criminal courthouse downtown. Sarah, he won't be coming in today. Or this week. Or if my calculations are correct, ever again." Elara pushed open the double-glass doors to the CEO's office. It was a shrine to Julian's ego. A massive mahogany desk, a panoramic view of the harbor, and a portrait of himself hanging on the wall. Elara walked over to the portrait. She stared at it for a moment, then calmly reached up, took it off the hook, and set it on the floor, facing the wall. She walked around the desk and sat in the high-backed leather chair. It was comfortable. Too comfortable. It felt like a throne. "Mrs. Thorne?" Elara looked up. Standing in the doorway was Marcus Kane, the CFO of Thorn Logistics. Marcus was a weasel of a man, the kind of guy who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had handed Julian the shovel. He looked pale. "Mr. Kane," Elara said pleasantly. "Come in. Close the door." Marcus closed the door but didn't sit. He fidgeted with his tie. "Look, Elara, Mrs. Thorne, I had no idea about the marriage situation. Julian told me—" "Sit down, Marcus," Elara commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had an edge of steel that made his knees weak. He sat. "I know you knew," Elara said, opening her briefcase and pulling out a tablet. "I know you helped him set up the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Blue Horizon Consulting, Vertex Holdings, and my personal favorite, Single Man LLC. Marcus swallowed hard. I was just following orders. He's the CAO. He was the CAO, Elara corrected. As of this morning, the board of directors has received my emergency motion. Given Julian's incarceration and the fraud investigation, they have instated me as interim CEO, pending the asset division. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. This is a letter of resignation, Marcus. It cites personal reasons. Marcus looked at the paper, then back at her. His eyes narrowed slightly. And if I don't sign it? Then I hand this over to the FBI, Elara said, tapping the tablet. I have emails, Marcus. Emails where you explicitly discuss how to hide the profits from the Sterling merger to avoid paying dividends to the minority shareholders. That's federal prison time. Julian might be the face of the fraud, but you were the mechanic. Marcus stared at her. He realized in that moment that the plain, quiet wife he had ignored at company Christmas parties 5 years ago, was gone. This woman was a shark. He picked up the pen and signed the paper with a shaking hand. "Smart choice," Ilara said. "Now get out. Security will escort you." As Marcus fled the office, Ilara spun the chair around to look out the window. She didn't have time to gloat. She had a company to save. The phone on the desk buzzed. She pressed the speaker button. "Mrs. Thorne?" Sarah's voice came through, sounding terrified. "Mr. Thorne is here. He's in the lobby. Security is trying to stop him, but he's screaming." Ilara sighed. She expected this. Julian had likely posted bail. "Let him up," Ilara said. "Let's finish this." 3 minutes later, Julian Thorne burst into the office. He looked like a wreck. He was wearing the same tuxedo from the night before, but the shirt was unbuttoned, the tie was missing, and he smelled of stale jail coffee and desperation. "You!" he screamed, pointing a finger at her. "Get out of my chair! Get out of my office!" Ilara didn't flinch. She rested her elbows on the desk and steepled her fingers. "Good morning, Julian. How was the holding cell? I hear the mattresses are terrible." "I made bail," Julian sneered, marching toward the desk. $2 million, and now I'm going to sue you for everything you have. Impersonating an officer of the company. Trespassing. You're finished." "I'm the interim CEO, Julian," Ilara said calmly. "Approved by the board at 8 a.m. You see, when the stock price drops 40% in one night, because the CIO is arrested for bigamy and fraud, the board tends to panic. I offered them stability." "Stability?" Julian slammed his hands on the desk, leaning over her. "You don't know the first thing about logistics. You were a receptionist when I met you. You're nothing without me." Ilara stood up. She wasn't tall, but in that moment, she seemed to loom over him. "I wasn't just a receptionist, Julian. I was the one who fixed your spreadsheets when you couldn't do the math. I was the one who negotiated the supplier contracts when you were too afraid to pick up the phone. I ran this company from the shadows for years while you took the credit." She picked up a remote control and pointed it at the large screen on the wall. It flickered to life, showing a complex flow chart of shipping routes and accounts. "And I know about Project Anchor," she said. Julian froze. His face went grey. "Project Anchor," Ilara continued. "The illegal dumping of chemical waste in international waters to cut shipping costs for your clients. That's how you got the Sterling deal, isn't it? You undercut the competition by breaking environmental laws." "You can't prove that," Julian whispered. "I don't have to," Ilara said, "because you kept records. You're a narcissist, Julian. You keep records of everything to prove how smart you are. I found the hard drive in the safe at the house. The combination was your birthday. You really are that predictable." Julian collapsed into one of the guest chairs. He put his head in his hands. The fight had left him. He realized, finally, that he wasn't dealing with a scorned woman. He was dealing with a superior intellect that he had foolishly underestimated. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice muffled. "You want the money? Take it. You want the house? Take it. Just don't release the Anchor files. That's 20 years in prison. Please, Ilara, we were family once." Ilara looked at him. She remembered the man she had married, the charming, ambitious dreamer. She searched for that man in his eyes, but all she saw was greed and fear. "We were family," Ilara agreed. "But you killed that family, Julian. You killed it the day you looked at me and decided I wasn't shiny enough for your new life." She pressed a button on the intercom. "Security? Mr. Thorne is ready to leave, and please inform the NYPD that we have additional evidence to submit regarding environmental crimes." Julian looked up, betrayal written all over his face. "You said I thought we were negotiating." "We aren't negotiating, Julian," Ilara said, sitting back down in the leather chair. "I'm cleaning house." 3 weeks had passed since the party. The scandal was still the talk of New York, but the legal machinery was moving with brutal efficiency. Ilara sat in a conference room at the district attorney's office. The room smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Across from her sat Detective Miller and the lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named D.A. Reynolds. "Mrs. Thorne," Reynolds began, organizing a stack of files. "The evidence you provided regarding the tax fraud and the environmental violations is substantial. We have enough to put Julian away for a long time. But there's a complication." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "A complication?" "Julian is pleading innocence on the intent," Reynolds said. "He's claiming that he truly believed the divorce was finalized. He's claiming that his cousin, Vinny, conned him. If the jury believes Julian was just a victim of his cousin's incompetence, he might beat the bigamy and fraud charges. He'll just get hit with negligence." Ilara frowned. "He knew. He told me to sign the papers, but he never gave me a copy. He knew Vinny was unreliable. It was calculated deniability." "We know that," Miller interjected, "but proving it in court is different. We need Vinny." "Vinny is in prison," Ilara said. "He was released on parole 2 days ago," Reynolds said, "and he's gone underground. If Julian's lawyers got to him, paid him off, Vinny could testify that Julian thought the divorce was real. That destroys our fraud case." Ilara tapped her fingers on the table. "Vinny. Vincent Gambino, Julian's cousin. A small-time hustler who always wanted to be a big shot, but lacked the brains or the charm." "I know where he is," Ilara said suddenly. The DA looked surprised. "You do? We have NYPD looking for him." "Julian and Vinny had a hideout when they were kids," Ilara explained. "An old fishing cabin in the Catskills. It belonged to their grandfather. Julian hated it. Too many mosquitoes. But Vinny loved it. He thought he was a rugged outdoorsman. Whenever Vinny got in trouble with loan sharks, he went to the cabin." "Can you take us there?" Miller asked. "I can give you the address," Ilara said, "but you might need me to go in. Vinny hates cops. He won't talk to you. But he always had a soft spot for me." It was true. In the early days, when Julian was too busy working to come home for dinner, Vinny would sometimes stop by with a pizza. He was a crook, yes, but he had felt bad for Ilara. He had seen how Julian treated her. 5 hours later, an unmarked SUV crunched up the gravel driveway of a dilapidated cabin deep in the woods of upstate New York. Detective Miller killed the engine. "Stay in the car, Mrs. Thorne. We'll clear it first." "He won't shoot," Ilara said, opening her door. "He's not violent. He's just a coward." She stepped out into the cool mountain air. The cabin looked abandoned, but she saw a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. She walked up the rotting wooden steps and knocked on the door. "Vinny?" "It's Ilara." Silence. Then, the sound of a deadbolt sliding back. The door cracked open, revealing a face that had aged 10 years in the last 5. Vinny had thinning hair, bad teeth, and eyes that darted nervously side to side. "Ilara," he rasped. "What are you doing here? Did Julian send you?" "No," Ilara said. "Julian is trying to blame everything on you, Vinny. He's telling the feds that you tricked him, that you stole the filing money and lied about the divorce. He's going to let you take the fall for the bigamy and the fraud." Vinny's jaw dropped. "That rat! That dirty rat! I did what he told me to do." "I know," Ilara said gently. "Can I come in?" Vinny opened the door wider. The cabin was a mess of empty beer cans and instant noodle cups. Vinny paced the small room, agitated. "He told me not to file it," Vinny shouted, waving his hands. He said, "Vinny, Just stamp it with a fake seal. I don't want to pay the alimony. He said if we filed it for real, the judge would make him split the business assets because the company was growing. He wanted to keep it all. Did he pay you? Ilara asked. He gave me $5,000, Vinny scoffed. $5,000 to risk a felony, and now he's throwing me under the bus? He's going to send you back to prison, Vinny, Ilara said. Unless you help me. How? The DA is outside, Ilara said, gesturing to the window. If you testify against Julian, if you tell them he ordered you to fake the divorce, they'll give you immunity for the forgery. You walk free. Julian goes down. Vinny looked at the window, then at Ilara. He looked at the fear and determination in her eyes. He really replaced you with that model chick, huh? Vinny asked, shaking his head. I told him he was an idiot. You were the only real thing in his life. He made his choice, Ilara said. Now make yours. Vinny took a deep breath. He grabbed a dirty jacket from the back of a chair. All right, he said. Let's go fry the bastard. The Manhattan Criminal Courthouse was a fortress of grey stone and grim faces, but on the day of the People versus Julian Thorne, it felt more like a movie premiere. News vans clogged the streets, protesters holding signs about corporate greed and environmental justice lined the steps. Inside courtroom 302, the air was thin with tension. Julian sat at the defense table. The transformation was stark. The billionaire glow was gone. His skin was sallow, his eyes rimmed with red, and his expensive suit hung loosely on a frame that had lost 20 pounds in stress. He refused to look at the gallery, where former business partners and socialites whispered behind their hands. Ilara sat in the front row behind the prosecution. She wore white, a sharp, pristine suit that signaled innocence and power. She didn't look at Julian. She looked at the jury. The defense calls Julian Thorne to the stand. Julian's lawyer, a high-priced shark named Mr. Sterling, no relation to Arthur, though the irony wasn't lost on anyone, announced. Julian stood up. He smoothed his tie and walked to the witness box. He was going to play the role of the misunderstood genius. Mr. Thorne, his lawyer began softly, did you intend to commit bigamy? Absolutely not, Julian said, his voice steady, practiced. I am a man of details. I run a global logistics empire. I delegated the divorce proceedings to my cousin, Vincent, because I wanted to help him. I trusted him. I had no idea he pocketed the money and forged the documents. I have lived the last 5 years believing I was a single man. He looked at the jury, flashing a dim, tragic smile. I fell in love with Tiffany. I wanted to start a family. Why would I risk everything I built for a lie? I am the victim of a family betrayal. The jury seemed to sway slightly. Julian was charismatic. He was a salesman, and he was selling his innocence well. Then D.A. Reynolds stood up for cross-examination. Mr. Thorne, she said, walking toward him. You claim you are a man of details, a man who checks everything. I am, Julian said. You check shipping manifests for cargo containers in Singapore? Yes. You check the fuel efficiency reports of your jet fleet down to the decimal? Of course. That is good business. So, Reynolds said, leaning on the railing. You expect this jury to believe that a man who checks the tire pressure of his delivery trucks didn't check the final divorce decree of his own marriage for 5 years? Julian clenched his jaw. I trusted my cousin. Let's talk about your cousin, Reynolds said. The prosecution calls Vincent Gambino as a rebuttal witness. A murmur went through the court. Julian's eyes widened. He hadn't known Vinny was in custody. He thought Vinny was in Mexico. The side door opened, and Vinny walked in, flanked by 2 marshals. He looked cleaned up, wearing a cheap suit Ilara had bought him. He sat in the witness chair and pointed a shaking finger at Julian. "Mr. Gambino," Reynolds asked, "did you forge the divorce papers?" "I did," Vinny said, his voice cracking. "Why?" "Because he told me to," Vinny shouted, looking at Julian. "He called me on November 14th, 2019. I remember the date because it was his birthday. He said, 'Vinny, I need you to make her go away, but I don't want to split the assets. The company is about to blow up. If I divorce her for real, she gets half. Just fake it. She's too quiet to notice.'" "Liar!" Julian screamed, jumping up from his seat. "You lying junkie, I never said that." "Order!" Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne." "I have proof!" Vinny yelled over the noise. "I kept the voicemail. I knew you'd try to screw me over one day, Julian. I kept the old phone." The courtroom went dead silent. D.A. Reynolds held up a small evidence bag containing an old, cracked iPhone. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to play evidence item 4B. The judge nodded. A hush fell over the room as the audio played over the court speakers. The voice was younger, more arrogant, but undeniably Julian's. "Vinny, it's me. Look, don't file the papers. Just get a seal made at that shop in Chinatown. Stamp 'em and give 'em to Ilara. She won't check. I need to keep the equity for the IPO next year. Just handle it, and I'll give you $5,000. Don't mess this up." Click. Julian stood frozen in the witness box. His face was the color of ash. There was no spinning this. There was no charm that could undo the sound of his own greed. "Mr. Thorne," D.A. Reynolds said, her voice cold, "you didn't just commit bigamy. You committed conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and grand larceny against your lawful wife. And that's before we even get to the Project Anchor environmental crimes." Julian looked at Ilara. For the first time in the trial, he locked eyes with her. He expected to see hate. He expected to see triumph. But Ilara just looked done. She looked like someone watching a boring movie reach its predictable end. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked out of the courtroom before the verdict was even read. She didn't need to hear it. She knew the ending. 6 months later. The office that used to be a shrine to Julian's ego had been transformed. The dark mahogany was gone, replaced by sleek glass and warm, natural light. The portrait of Julian was long gone. In its place was a large digital map of the world, glowing with live shipping routes. Ilara sat at the desk, reviewing the quarterly reports. "Excuse me, Ms. Vance. Ms. CEO." Ilara looked up. Sarah, the receptionist, was standing there with a smile. Sarah had kept her job, but Ilara had paid for her to take night classes in business management. She was now the executive assistant. "Yes, Sarah. We have the press waiting in the lobby for the rebranding announcement. And there's a letter for you. From upstate." Sarah placed a plain white envelope on the desk. The return address was the Otisville Federal Correctional Facility. Ilara stared at the envelope. She didn't open it. She knew what it would say. It would be begging. It would be blaming. It would be Julian trying to manipulate her one last time from behind bars, where he was currently serving year 1 of a 25-year sentence for fraud and environmental crimes. She picked up the letter. "Sarah?" "Yes, Mum." "Shred this," Ilara said, handing it back. "I don't read spam." Sarah grinned. "Understood." Ilara stood up and walked to the window. Manhattan sprawled out below her, a grid of endless possibility. The company, now renamed Vance Global Logistics, was thriving. She had settled the fines for Julian's crimes, fired the corrupt board members, and instituted a profit-sharing model for the employees. The stock was higher than it had ever been under Julian. And she wasn't alone. She had reconnected with old friends. She had started painting again. She had even gone on a few dates, though she was in no rush. She thought about Tiffany. The last she heard, the former model had sold the engagement ring, which Ilara had legally allowed her to keep as a gesture of pity, to pay off her own debts, and was now trying to launch a reality show that nobody wanted to watch. Karma had come for everyone. Julian had wanted a queen. He just didn't realize he already had one. He was just too blinded by the shine of fake gold to notice the value of the real iron next to him. Ilara checked her reflection in the glass. The woman staring back wasn't the plain wife anymore. She was powerful. She was just. And she was free. She turned away from the window and walked toward the door to face the press. She had an empire to run. So what did we learn from the fall of Julian Thorne? Julian made the classic mistake of the arrogant narcissist. He confused kindness with weakness. He thought that because Ilara was quiet, she was stupid. He thought that because she was loyal, she was submissive. He built a castle on a foundation of lies, assuming that the person holding the blueprint would never speak up. But the truth is, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting or bragging. It's the one who sits quietly, watches everything, and keeps the receipts. Ilara didn't just get revenge. She got justice. She proved that dignity and intelligence will always outlast flash and greed. What would you have done in Ilara's shoes? Would you have crashed the party, or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.